rulemaking is going to start next year on increasing the weight of the LSA requirement from the current 1320, I believe it is, to 3,600 pounds, which would mean you could actually fly under a light sport pilot certificate of 172. And the speed will change too, up to 150. So we're really trying to impact the lower end and expand access. And that's our big thing, is how do we find more avenues and paths to get people into aviation as low a cost as possible.
That was EAA President Jack Pelton, and you'll hear the full interview with him later in the show. Hello, and thank you for joining us for episode 79 of the Aviation News Talk podcast, where we bring you general aviation news and safety tips that pilots and student pilots like you can use. Today, we're bringing you interviews with over a dozen speakers and pilots who attended the AOPA Regional Fly-In at Carbondale, Illinois last weekend. Plus, coming up in the news, the FAA reauthorization bill is now law, and we'll tell you what it contains and doesn't contain for general aviation. Mike Goulian is back in first place in the Red Bull races, but after the races, a pilot and Red Bull official was arrested, and we'll tell you why. A deadly Falcon 50 crash left both pilots dead, neither of whom was rated to fly the plane, and we'll tell you what else wasn't working on that plane. An ultralight couple found themselves hanging upside down from the same wire previously struck by another aircraft, and we'll tell you where this wire is that you'll want to avoid. And finally, a California pilot is in jail shortly after he landed in a Cessna 210 in Texas, and we'll tell you why. Welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk about general aviation. I'm Max Trescott. I'm here to educate and inform you and hopefully have a little fun. Along the way, I'll be sharing my over 40 years of experience as a pilot, author of the G1000 Glass Cockpit Handbook, and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. I'm also a specialist in Cirrus aircraft like the SR20, SR22, and the SF50 Vision Jet. So if you're thinking about buying one of these aircraft or would like some training in one, please call me now for a free consultation and possibly a free demo flight if it's a new aircraft you're interested in. And if you're new to the show, we typically do a weekly news-oriented show, including listener feedback and answers to questions. And occasionally we do an interview show. Earlier this week, in episode 78, we interviewed Roger Whittier of the Cirrus Owner Pilots Association about aircraft type clubs and what makes COPA stand out from the many other type clubs. So if you missed that episode, you may want to check it out. All this and more, and the news starts now. Late last week, the president signed a 5-year FAA reauthorization bill into law. The 1,200-page bill contains a lot of items for the airlines that have been widely reported on, but relatively few changes for general aviation. The bill is significant for what it doesn't include, and that's no provision in the bill for privatization of air traffic control. Later on the show, Jack Pelton, president of EAA, will talk about privatization and how the bill will affect EAA. And while some may think this bill means we can relax for 5 years, I think the GA community needs to remain vigilant that ATC privatization doesn't rear its ugly head in some yet unknown end run around the normal 5-year FAA reauthorization process. I've read through the bill. Here are some of the things I found in the bill that relate to general aviation. Section 124 says that the construction of a covered aircraft, which we'll explain in just a moment, shall be treated as an aeronautical activity for the purpose of determining an airport's compliance with a grant assurance made under this section or any other provisions of the law. Later, they go on to explain that a covered aircraft is an aircraft used or intended to be used exclusively for recreational purposes and constructed or under construction by a private individual at a general aviation airport. Now, I think this means that any airport which receives FAA money can't prohibit the construction of home-built aircraft in a hangar because that activity is now specifically designated as an aeronautical activity by the bill. Section 163 is regarding lead emissions, and it requires that a study be done and to put a report out on aviation gasoline and report to Congress within 1 year. That study shall include an assessment of existing non-leaded fuel alternatives to aviation gasoline used by piston-powered GA aircraft. Section 202 requires the creation of a Safety Oversight and Certification Advisory Committee. And this committee is going to look at a minimum, aircraft and flight standards certification processes, including efforts to streamline those processes. And they are required to have representatives of general aviation on this committee. Section 215, review of certification process for small GA aircraft. This requires the Inspector General to do a review of the FAA's implementation of the final rule that was titled Revision of Airworthiness Standards for Normal, Utility, Acrobatic, and Commuter Category Aircraft. They say that the task force can include representatives with knowledge of flight standards, regulatory processes, and of general aviation. Section 232, an FAA task force on flight standards reform. In this case, they're talking about what traditionally have been known as the FAASTos, the regional offices around the country. These are now known, by the way, as FISOs. I think the D has been dropped. But it says the duties of the task force shall include at a minimum identifying best practices and providing recommendations for current and anticipated budgetary environments with respect to 1, simplifying and streamlining flight standards regulatory processes, 2, reorganizing flight standard services to establish an entity organized by function rather than geographic region if appropriate, and 3, FAA aviation safety inspector training opportunities and a number of items related to FAASTos. Section 317 requires that the FAA and NTSB review general aviation safety, and that study should include a review of all GA accidents since the year 2000, including a review of the number of such accidents, the number of injuries and fatalities, and so on. And they say based on the results of this study, the administrator shall make recommendations, including respect to regulations, enforcement activities, as the administrator considers necessary to address general aviation safety issues identified under the study, protect persons and property on the ground, and improve the safety of general aviation operators in the United States. Section 506 relates to air shows. It says on an annual basis, the FAA shall work with representatives of the administration-approved air shows, the GA community, and stadiums and other large outdoor events and venues to identify and resolve to the maximum extent practical scheduling conflicts between administration-approved air shows and large outdoor events and venues. Section 507 is a Part 91 review, reform, and streamlining. This involves the establishment of a task force not later than 90 days after the bill was signed into law. And it says that it's going to conduct an assessment of the oversight process of the FAA for aircraft under Part 91 and make recommendations to streamline the applicable authorization and approval processes, improving safety and reducing regulatory cost burdens and delays for FAA and aircraft owners who operate under Part 91. Now, here's one that was new to me, Section 508, aircraft registration. Not later than 180 days after the law is signed, the FAA shall initiate a rulemaking to increase the duration of aircraft registrations for non-commercial general aviation aircraft to 10 years. You may recall that registrations used to be good forever, and then in an effort to try and clean up their database, the FAA instituted a 3-year renewal process. Looks like Congress is now telling them to make that 10 years. And finally, Section 587 has to do with economic impact of airports that are under TFRs. It says that not later than 1 year after the enactment of this law, that the FAA shall submit to Congress a report containing the results of a study, and they say that they should make recommendations based on an analysis of the economic effects of TFRs, particularly those related to Section 91-141 on airports or aviation-related businesses located or based in an area covered by the temporary TFR, and B, potential options and recommendations for mitigating identified negative economic effects on airports or aviation-related businesses that are located or based in an area frequently covered by temporary TFRs, and an analysis of the potential for using security procedures similar to those described in the Maryland 3 program, which allows properly vetted private pilots to fly to and from the 3 GA airports closest to the National Capital Region during TFRs. And this relates to the following airports: Solberg Airport and Somerset Airport, which are in New Jersey, and Palm Beach County Airport, also known as Lantana Airport. And you'll be able to find a link to the full text of this bill if you'd like to read it for yourself on our Patreon site at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. From GreenvilleOnline.com, the NTSB released a preliminary report from a plane crash that killed 2 and injured 2 others at Greenville, South Carolina. The report states that the braking anti-skid switch was inoperative on the Falcon 50 that went off the end of runway 19 on September 27th. A placard that says INOP was placed by the braking anti-skid switch on the day of the crash. The parking brake was also in the off position, and the fire handles have been pulled, according to the report. The report also details the certifications for both the pilot and the co-pilot, which don't match the requirements for flying the aircraft. The pilot had only a second-in-command privileges to fly that jet, meaning he could only fly it as a co-pilot next to someone with a pilot-in-command rating. The right-seat pilot on the flight held a private pilot certificate. The NTSB report states that he too lacked the FAA-required certification to be a co-pilot on the flight. From flyingmag.com, that's of course Flying Magazine's website, Michael Goulian had a perfect run in the Final Four round at the first of 2 Red Bull air races on American soil at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in Indianapolis, Indiana. An emotional Goulian kissed the bricks on the speedway, following a tradition started by car racers. He's the first American Red Bull race pilot to win at Indy, much to the excitement of the 40,000 air race fans in attendance. Goulian barely made it into the final round as he was the fastest loser after the round of 14, where the racers compete against each other, which earned him an opportunity to fly in the round of 8, which is all based on time and penalty points. He advanced to the final 4 and finished with a penalty-free 1 minute, 6.2 second lap, half a second ahead of Canadian Pete McLeod and 0.7 seconds ahead of Frenchman Nicolas Ivanov. Czech pilot Martin Sanka, who dominated the past 3 races, dropped to second place after a disappointing 10th place finish this weekend. Goulian is pretty well situated now with 5 points more than Sanka and 7 more than Australian Matt Hall. All 3 are now guaranteed to be on the podium for the World Championship. However, the position in which they will stand is going to be determined in Fort Worth on November 18th, so it's still anyone's race. But from IndyStar.com, a top official with the Red Bull Air Race was arrested in downtown Indianapolis just hours after the race concluded. Police arrested 51-year-old William Cruikshank after getting a call from a member of the cleaning staff at the Palomino restaurant around 3:30 a.m. on Monday. Officers observed Cruikshank to be intoxicated when they approached him near the entrance to the Palomino. It's not clear why Cruikshank was allegedly trying to get into the restaurant, but police say his interactions with officers prompted his arrest. He was arrested on preliminary charges of public intoxication, criminal recklessness, and resisting law enforcement. By all accounts, Cruikshank is a highly respected expert pilot. An online profile says he served in the British Royal Air Force on deployments to Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Since retiring in 2010, he's flown with the England-based Wildcats aerobatic team. Currently, he serves as Director of Aviation and Sport with Red Bull Air Race. As Director of Aviation and Sport, Cruikshank is responsible for designing race courses and training the pilots. Cruikshank was ordered released from custody and walked out of the Marion County lockup after 5 p.m. on Monday. No bond was set, according to jail officials. From avweb.com, the rate of fatal accidents in experimental amateur-built aircraft dropped last year to the lowest rate ever recorded, according to EAA. The annual activity survey conducted by the FAA shows the estimated number of hours flown in experimental aircraft rose from 890,000 hours in 2016 to 950,000 hours in 2017. At the same time, the number of fatal accidents fell from 32 to 26, dropping the rate from 3.6 fatal accidents per 100,000 hours to 2.63. Quote, these statistics show that growth and safety are not mutually exclusive in our community, according to Sean Elliott, EAA's VP of Advocacy and Safety. While the progress is excellent, he said, the goal is to continue to improve. We cannot afford to be complacent, he said. EAA will continue to be highly engaged in initiatives and programs to enhance aviation safety. By the way, just to compare these numbers, they're currently at 2.63 fatal accidents per 100,000 hours. The current rate for all general aviation is now below 1 accident per 100,000 hours. So this is still more than 2.5 times the overall general aviation accident rate. From iPadPilotNews.com comes a story that ForeFlight now has support for the Garmin GDL 50, 51, and 52 ADS-B receivers. Now, you may recall back in episode 62, we interviewed Joey Ferreira of Garmin about the GDL 52, which I evaluated and used on a number of long cross-country flights. You can now use these directly with ForeFlight. In the past, I used them with Garmin Pilot. And there are several different models, but the most capable is the GDL 52, which is available for $1,149. It includes both ADS-B as well as Cirrus XM. It comes with a $200 rebate and also a 3-month trial subscription to Cirrus XM's Pilot Preferred Weather, as well as all-access audio, so you can essentially listen to the radio when you fly. According to iPad Pilot News, quote, in our opinion, the GDL 52 is the most interesting product here. There simply isn't another portable receiver that combines as many features into one unit. It's a great way to view high-quality Cirrus XM weather while still receiving ADS-B traffic and backup information. It is not inexpensive, but the feature list is long, and the $200 rebate gets the price under $1,000. They do add that Cirrus XM audio controls are not currently available in ForeFlight And in a separate story that came out later from iPad Pilot News, they talk about the ForeFlight Sentry, which is a new ADS-B receiver that combines a carbon monoxide detector. And later in this show, I'll have an interview with someone from ForeFlight who I talked with at Carbondale about this. But real briefly, it says that 1 year after releasing Scout, which was their tiny ADS-B receiver manufactured by UAvionics, ForeFlight unveiled the follow-on product. And it's the Sentry, which is larger than the Scout, but also packs in a lot more features, including GPS and AHRS and carbon monoxide monitoring. They say at $499, it's a compelling package. They say Sentry connects to your iPad via Wi-Fi. It accommodates up to 5 devices. So obviously a number of people could be monitoring this in the airplane if they all had iPhones or iPads. Simply open ForeFlight and you'll start receiving the full list of ADS-B products from radar to METARs to PIREPs. And they say 2 important features that were missing from the Scout, but which are available in Sentry, are GPS and AHRS. They say the addition of these 2, plus a built-in 12-hour battery, makes Sentry a complete iPad accessory, driving movie map screens, terrain alerts, and a full synthetic vision display. ForeFlight shows a handy setup screen the first time you connect, which ensures that you get it properly mounted. And they say it's the first ADS-B receiver to include a carbon monoxide detector, and they say that'll be helpful for piston airplane pilots in the winter, since many cabin heating systems are susceptible to exhaust leaks and potentially serious CO poisoning problems. And they mentioned that Sentry is available for $499 and that it charges with a USB-C cable. And we've got links to both of these ADS-B products in our show notes, so you can click on them for more information and ordering information if you're interested in either one of them. In international news, this is a commercial airliner story, but I mention it simply because the same kind of issue could happen with general aviation pilots. From the avherald.com, an Arabian A320 lined up and departed in the wrong direction. The story says an Air Arabia Airbus A320 was taxiing for departure from Sharjah, that's in the UAE, runway 30. The aircraft entered the runway for an intersection departure from taxiway B14 and turned into the direction of runway 12, which was opposite to their intended direction of takeoff. Takeoff distance available from that point was just 10,020 meters, or about 3,300 feet, instead of the 3,000 meters, or 9,900 feet, in the intended direction on runway 30. Now, they say when you include the full paved runway ends and the safety area, the distance available was 1,150 meters, or just 3,760 feet in the direction the crew took off. The crew managed to become airborne in time to avoid any obstacles, climbed out to safety, and continued to their destination without incident. After entering the runway and realizing the remaining distance was too short, the commander took over the controls and continued the takeoff while selecting flaps at the second position and used TOGA, that would be a takeoff go-around power. The aircraft took off at the end of the runway. After takeoff, a call from ATC was received informing the crew about the wrong runway used. On September 19th, after this incident, Air Arabia instructed their pilots that all intersection departures were banned with immediate effect after one of their flights took off from an intersection in the wrong direction. Both pilots have been suspended pending the investigation. And I'll add to that, both pilots are very lucky that they survived and there was no accident in this particular case. And a good practice that a lot of professional pilots use is that whenever they enter a runway, they check their compass or their heading indicator to see that the number matches the runway and the intended runway that they were planning to use. Apparently, in this case, this crew didn't do that. And Aeronews.net brings us this story from South Africa. A couple in their 60s were left dangling some 300 feet in the air after an ultralight they were flying on their anti-rhino poaching patrol in South Africa impacted a zip line and got tangled up in the thrill ride's wire. According to the UK newspaper The Daily Mail, they say the wire became entangled with a bolt just under the propeller of the Bat Hawk airplane. That left the husband and wife, identified only by their first names as Peter and Mary, hanging from the wire in a nose-up attitude. The zip line is part of a theme park and runs through a wilderness area of the Pilanesberg National Park. Riders can reach speeds of up to 100 miles per hour on this attraction, but the dangling airplane was rocking in the wind for several hours until the pair was rescued. The pilot of a Bell Jet Ranger 206 was fatally injured in 2011 when he impacted the same zipline wire while traveling to pick up some friends on a farm near Sun City, according to the report. And finally, from aviationpros.com comes a story of a 32-year-old California man who appeared last week in federal court in Lubbock, Texas, to face drug possession charges after he was arrested at the Hale County Airport, where federal agents seized 140 pounds of marijuana from an aircraft. Maxim Anatolievich Mironov appeared with his attorney for an initial appearance on a criminal complaint filed by Homeland Security investigations officials who accused Mironov of possessing between 50 to 100 kilograms of marijuana. Agents arrested Mironov on Thursday afternoon at the Hale County Airport, where he was refueling a Cessna 210. The criminal complaint doesn't state what brought Mironov to the agency's attention, but as agents inspected his flight certificates, an agent noticed 5 large duffel bags in the passenger compartment. Mironov reportedly told agents the bags contained equipment. However, the agents suspected the bags contained drugs. The agent described Mironov as acting nervous during the encounter as agents asked him about his flight plan. As he shuffled about the cabin looking for his medical certificate, Mironov denied agents' request to search his aircraft. The agents called on a Lubbock County Sheriff's Office drug detecting dog to sniff around the aircraft. The dog alerted agents to the presence of drugs, and the search found 125 individually sealed packages of marijuana weighing about 62 kilograms. Mironov, who was listed with a Santa Barbara, California address, reportedly told investigators he picked up the drugs in California and was delivering the drugs to an address in Birmingham, Alabama. Well, that's the news for this week. Coming up, interviews with a dozen pilots and speakers at the AOPA Carbondale, Illinois Regional Fly-In, including EAA President Jack Pelton, round-the-world Bonanza pilot Adrian Eichhorn, and FAASTeam Rep of the Year Catherine Cavagnaro. Stick around. We'll be back right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And welcome back. In a moment, we'll get to our interviews from the AOPA Carbondale, Illinois Regional Fly-In, but first let me give you a few quick updates. I want to thank one of our Patreon sponsors, Brandon Gonzalez, for inviting me onto his podcast last week, which is called Podcasting on a Plane. Brandon is an air traffic controller and a flight instructor, which gives him a rather unique perspective. He and I talked about 2 fatal Cirrus accidents, one in Texas and one in Florida, both of which involve some non-standard phraseology from air traffic control that may have been a contributing factor in both accidents. Now, the AOPA Air Safety Institute has produced excellent videos that show what happened in both of these accidents, and Brandon and I added our perspective on the accidents. Here's a brief clip from his episode 31 of Podcasting on a Plane.
So, Max, what were you thinking when you watched this video and heard this audio the first time?
Well, it was probably the perfect storm in some different ways. I think that everybody was trying to do the right thing, both the pilot and both the controller. I would say that the pilot was probably a little tired to begin with. It was a 3-hour flight coming down from Norman, Oklahoma. She was on that frequency with the Houston controller for almost 15 minutes. Part of that was before she arrived at the pattern, but it was a full 10 minutes once she was in the pattern. And you got to figure that was a pretty high workload. Not only were they given 3 different passes at the runway, but it wasn't just 3 runways. They kept changing, and sometimes on the same go around. It's like, oh, I'm going to do 3-5, but would you prefer 4? And just so many changes going on. I think that it was probably also confusing to the pilot to kind of identify, all right, now which one is runway 4? All right, okay, which one is runway 35? Where am I relative to those 2 runways? Which way do I turn, and so on? And certainly at least one point, the pilot was a little bit out of position, I think because of an ambiguous heading that, or turn that the controller gave at that particular point. But I also think on the controller side, maybe the controllers were either being a little too optimistic or trying to be a little too helpful. When I say optimistic, I think that they were really trying to squeeze her in. They knew they had a lot of arrivals, and they were just kind of thinking, yeah, I think I could make this work out. And yet they weren't able to make it work out in 3 different passes. So that tells me they were trying a little bit too hard to make it work when it just wasn't going to work. Now, I know you can't tell that every time. It's a little bit of a guesswork as to way it's, whether it's going to work or not. But geez, 3 different times not being able to figure out that there wasn't enough space between the aircraft to get her in. And so I think between the high workload as well as just the over helpfulness in the last case, I mean, I think that the last instruction from the controller, I mean, doesn't that have to go down as a record in terms of kind of a long, slightly confusing transmission?
Yeah, it sure does. I think in the NTSB report, it actually mentions here it was I think that one single transmission was 15 or 16 seconds long, which is which may be some sort of record. I'm not sure.
And I'll include a link to the podcast in our show notes. And of course, you can also find it at podcastingonaplane.com. I'll also include links to both of the AOPA Air Safety Institute videos we talked about, and you'll be able to find that in the show notes and also on our Patreon page at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. Again, Brandon, thanks so much for having me on the show. And I'd also like to thank AOPA for a couple of nice mentions they made last week about this show in their Aviation eBrief newsletter, which is sent out via email on October the 4th. They included a nice little piece that talked about Aviation News Talk, and they included a link there. And they also mentioned that I would be giving a seminar at the Fly-In at Carbondale. And then also I want to thank Mike Collins, who wrote a nice piece after Carbondale, kind of summarizing all the different things that occurred there. And in part of that summary, he talked about the seminar that I gave as Max Trescott shared insights in flying with modern GPS receivers and Friday's IFR Advanced Workshop. Among his recommendations, when you load an instrument approach, choose an IAF that doesn't require a course reversal, and if you're being vectored, activate the leg it looks like you'll intercept. And if you can't tell what leg your aircraft is pointed toward, activate the leg that's closer to the airport. He also includes a photograph of me there giving the seminar, so that was really great. Thanks so much. Appreciate all those nice mentions from AOPA. And here's some of the places that I will be over the next month or so. In fact, speaking of AOPA, I'll be in Gulf Shores, Alabama, October 26th and 27th. Come on down if you'd like to hear my advanced IFR seminar. I'm also going to be picking up an aircraft, a new Cirrus, in Charlotte, North Carolina, sometime around the 18th or 19th of October, and bringing that back to California with its new owner, so that should be quite fun. And then in November, I think I've mentioned to you, I should be in Orange, Australia. I still got to make all the arrangements for that trip, but that will be November 9th and 10th and 11th in Australia. And I'll be finishing this episode up probably in my hotel room in Las Vegas, as I'll be attending M16, the annual migration of many Cirrus aircraft owners back to Las Vegas. And I'll be giving a presentation on Saturday there on night flying safety, and also have a booth where I'll get a chance to meet some of you there. So look forward to meeting you there. And of course, after that, man, I'm going to take a rest. I think it's been a lot of travel, but it's been a heck of a lot of fun meeting many of you at these different locations. Thanks so much for coming out to say hello. And I've posted some really interesting things this week on the Patreon site. So let me just mention some of these videos that you really want to see. The fearoflanding.com blog is written by my friend Sylvia in Europe, and she has found a video of a helicopter rescue operation that went bad. Fortunately, the people in the helicopter survived. The helicopter was able to break away, and what happened was it was a high-altitude rescue. They were looking to pull some people off the side of a hill. And unfortunately, as some of the people were getting closer to the helicopter, the ropes got more and more taut to the point where one of the ropes ended up in the main rotor blades, and that resulted in damage to the helicopter. The helicopter had to break off. It had some severe vibration. They were able to get it down on the ground safely. But you really want to see this. I mean, it shows some of the how easy it is in some of these complex things to make one mistake that could have led to disaster. Now, the other video I've just put up there is of a Penn State helicopter incident that occurred in my home state. Of course, I'm very, very near and dear to Penn State and State College because, what can I say, the girl I took to the prom was a townie who lived in State College, so I visited State College many, many times. There was an incident in which a state police helicopter essentially buzzed a rowdy crowd of tailgaters, and they got ridiculously low to the point where all kinds of debris was flying everywhere, including I could see at least one piece that went back up through the rotor blades. Looks like a pretty dangerous thing to have done. I understand that apparently they were trying to break up what was going on below, but there has been an investigation which has started into this, and my guess is they won't be using the helicopter for this kind of purpose in the future. And of course, I've also posted the two videos I mentioned from AOPA's Air Safety Institute. So just go on out to the Patreon page, aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, click on post, and you can check all these things out. And while you're there, if you'd like to throw a few dollars our way to support us, that would be great. Let me thank our new Patreon supporters from the last week. They include Edward Varso, who has edited his pledge up to $20, so we thank him very much, Mark Scanlon, and also Steve Meinzen. And once a month, I read the names of our biggest super supporters who all contribute at least $20 a month. And these include Jeremy Zawadny, he's a software developer. Peter Long, friend of mine in Australia, former CFI here in California. Seth Lake, military instructor, pilot, and flight instructor in Arkansas. You can find out about his podcast and flight school at gonogo.aero. Friend of the show, Jason Blair, who we've had on several times. He's a DPE pilot examiner, and he runs a blog at jasonblair.net. Joseph Haggerty II, he's a Mooney owner and pilot. Michael Rogers, Cirrus owner and pilot in Southern California. Michael Spain, student pilot in Oklahoma, who's been planning to buy a Cirrus. Larry Noe from New York, New York. He flies a Bonanza G36. Carl and Ann Rossi of Maine Cooncat Aviation. They operate 3 Cessna T240 aircraft. Roger Griggs, he's got over 2,000 hours in the TBM 850, and he recently acquired a Meridian 600. Chuck Price, his website for the company he works at is tusimple.ai. Don Dillman, professional pilot who runs a training center for a very large air carrier. He owns a Bonanza F-33 Alpha, and he just reinstated his CFI. Stella Sue, student pilot with me in the SR20, so we fly a lot. And we streamed one of her flight lessons live on Facebook Live, and you can find that on the Patreon site. Jonathan Weisswasser, a vascular surgeon, also a ham radio operator who flies a Meridian. Jim Barrett, he runs Sonic's ESD. They specialize in active noise control, and he flies a Cirrus SR20 G6. Fabio Camlos, he's a doctor and SR22 owner here in California. Lance Fletcher, former crew chief in the Air Force on the F-111F. He's wanted to learn to fly for decades, as I'm sure many of you have, but he's taking the plunge. He's doing it now. So congratulations to him for getting started. Joseph Morales, he's a patent lawyer in Maryland, a former National Guard Black Hawk pilot, and he's planning to work on his commercial and his CFI, which is great. We need more CFIs out there. Moj Kazi, he's a software developer in Silicon Valley who's been helping with the Aviation News Talk website. And he's checked out in the SR20, and he can't wait to get checked out in the SR22. I'm sorry I had to cancel our flight because I'm headed to Las Vegas. Tyson Weiss, co-founder and CEO of ForeFlight, which I'm sure everybody is well aware of. I want to thank him for his very generous support. Adam Nunn, I think he's out of Texas, flies a Piper Cherokee. And Chris Carnahan, who I saw in AOPA Carbondale. He has a 1955 V-tail Bonanza, flies out of Spirit Airport in St. Louis. Anthony Pitt, private pilot in sunny Brisbane, Australia, flies a 172 out of a club at Redcliffe. Jeffrey Bell, he's a general surgeon who's working on a CFI certificate, flies a Citation Bravo. Brian Brisk, he's a former television attorney and also a software business owner who is changing careers. Right now he's working on getting all the ratings he needs to become an airline pilot, so I know he's having a lot of fun. David DeCurtis, he recently stepped up into a Honda jet after 14 years of flying an SR-22. And Edward Varso, he spent the last 20 years in law enforcement, and he's a member of the Riverside Pilots Flying Club in Southern California. And finally, Antoine Hannecom. He owns a Cirrus, and I'm scheduled to fly with him when I'm in Australia next month. He also did a great job of sending out emails and getting lots of other people to sign up for that CPPP in Australia. So thank you so much to him. And I want to thank all of our supporters. No matter what you do to help support the show, I greatly appreciate it. Frankly, it's the interactions with listeners that kind of gives me the gas in the tank to keep going each week. So thank you so much for all your feedback and all your support. Now stick around because in 7 seconds, we have interviews with pilots and with some of our listeners who were at AOPA in Carbondale, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And EAA President Jack Pelton has just walked up. Jack, how are you?
Hey, Max, good to see you. I actually didn't expect to see you there, but I hope you're enjoying the warm weather here in Carbondale.
It's quite fun. And the funny thing is we've done interviews a number of times in the past, but never face to face.
No, we haven't. It's good. I really didn't know you were this tall and handsome.
Yeah, usually you just stare at a computer when we talk, but this is a lot more fun. So we had an interesting thing happen here just in the last couple of hours. FAA reauthorization bill just got signed. Tell us what that means for general aviation and for EAA.
It's the end of what essentially has been a battle since 1986 to get an FAA bill that has stable funding for 5 years. We've never had a 5-year bill since that period of time. And we've been fighting since 1986, the airlines wanting to privatize ATC. And so now with this new bill, we have 5 years of assured funding so we can get on with modernization, and we have assurance that there will be no privatization of the ATC. And that's at the bigger level. There's some specific things for EAA that are really important in that bill also.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those. What does this mean for EAA?
Well, back 4 years ago when sequestration took place, I'm not sure what the proper term for whatever that was, we were held hostage in a budget war between the FAA and the government. General Aviation was, and they were charging us, started out just close to $500,000 and escalated every year to where we were at $600,000 to pay for the controllers that come to Oshkosh to support our event. And in the past, that was always paid for by your gas tax money that funds the air traffic control system. So this was getting to be, it was onerous. I mean, an egregious fee on top of it. And now they have legislation that says they cannot charge for public safety for events like this because it's already being paid for. And so they finally had to tell the FAA, no, you've already have the funding. So for us, it's 5 years of relief of a very costly bill we've been paying.
And so obviously that's been extremely expensive. How have you dealt with that, and what will you be able to now do now that you're not paying all that money in the future? That's
a great question, because in absorbing that, what it meant was we could not fund some of our programs the way we'd like to. So we have a whole new group of programs in 2019 that we're launching, which I'm very excited about. It's kind of what we're calling Young Eagles 2.0. It's dealing with scholarships where we're going to have 100 $10,000 scholarships through our EA chapters for young people to learn to fly on an annual basis. And this is going to go on for quite some time. So we're allocating a grant that we got for that. And then we're also going to create some new programs, 14-year-old 1 week to solo and sailplanes at AirVenture, a program there, a collaboration with AMA to have build projects for a learn to fly RC plane for, like 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds. And then learn to fly those, and just more activities and initiatives besides that one Young Eagle flight.
Wow, I bet you feel a lot better about the money being spent that way.
Oh, we do. And then I think just this week we're working with a group called Aviation Adventures that we're going to collaborate, and it's a STEM education program where there's 9 ground school modules, 20 minutes apiece that we'll host at our chapters. As a young person goes through each of those modules, at the end, it qualifies for a Girl Scout aviation badge, a Boy Scout aviation badge, or your own. We're going to create our own little badge that goes with that. But another opportunity for kids beyond just that flight, where you're getting education on all things about aviation, learning to fly, and airport management, fire and rescue at airports, aviation mechanics.
Yeah, so clearly what you're telling me is you think it's important to get youth involved at all ages in aviation.
We really think it's critically important to get them engaged before high school. Because by the time they get to high school, they're working on standardized testing and college entrance and all that stuff. So to get new curriculum in front of them is hard. So we'd like them to enter their freshman year saying, I already know which way I want to track.
So I'm doing math on the fly here. 100 scholarships, $10,000. Sounds like $1 million.
It's $1 million a year.
That is fantastic. That's going to get a lot of people on their way. Now, 14-year-olds soloing at the AirVenture. Tell me about that. How many people will be involved, and when can people start to sign up?
Well, yeah, we a lot of people aren't aware of. We have our Light Sport Academy that runs during the summer at AirVenture, not during the event itself. And it's a 3-week to certificate for a light sport pilot. And with that program, you come to Oshkosh, you stay in the lodge, full immersion. We feed you, we fly. And at the end of 3 weeks, you'll leave with a light sport certificate, of which we've had now 6 classes, of which everyone has converted at the end of 3 weeks to a license. So we're going to use the scholarship program to help fund some of that. You can also use the scholarship locally. But we decided, how do we reach younger people? Because you really can't start doing that till 16 or 17. So at age 14, you're legally capable of soloing in a glider. And there are people in the U.S., the CAF and some other people, CAP, Embry-Riddle have had some of these courses regionally, And we've talked to them and we said, let's run a camp during the summer and limit it to 14-year-olds. And it's usually 8 people to a camp, 1 week long. And their track record has been really, really good of getting them through at least to solo. And so we thought, well, that's an accomplishment. A 14-year-old would go home and say, I did it. How do I do more? What's next? And it keeps them engaged.
Indeed. So I wish I were 14. I'm not. Tell me, how would a 14-year-old go about applying to do this? We
will put it on our website probably in the coming months at EAA.org, and it will be under our what we call our the click point on it is our academies, our flight academies. So that's coming soon, as they say.
And roughly how many people will be in the academy?
It'll be 8 people per class, and we hope to run 3 of them as a kind of the first year. And then, our big vision is then we take these things out regionally to where there are glider schools and people who have got the CFIs capable of doing it in the facilities, because we're certainly not a year-round venue for that kind of activity. But if we can pilot it and get the curriculum down pat, the training down pat, and train the trainers, if you will, we think we can then in the winter go south and other places to make this happen.
So I'm really interested in light sport, especially electrics, because I think that's going to lower the cost of flight training. What's on the horizon for being able to make changes that would allow people to fly light sport electric aircraft at low cost?
Right now, there's a committee that I believe GAMA has pulled together around changing the ASTM standards to include electric power plants. When they created that standard, towards the end, it got to we got to get something done. So they excluded electric power, any alternate fuel power, turbine power, so it's pretty just conventional. So we're in the process of getting that rulemaking done through an ARC. Once that occurs so that there's a regulatory path to get the electric airplanes, I think we'll start seeing a lot more of them. The technology for the electric is coming along. There's still the trade-off on battery to power to weight ratio to make that work. But for a training application, when you're really spending an awful lot of your time 1 hour sorties, if you will, or 1.5 hour sorties, that should be very, very doable. And to your point, the cost will be actually in reach of most people. I mean, when you think of, versus 100 low lead and renting a 172 or an airplane like that, this will be, I think, another game changer. We think also on top of that, rulemaking is going to start next year on increasing the weight of the LSA requirement from the current 1320, I believe it is, to 3,600 pounds, which would mean you could actually fly under a light sport pilot certificate, a 172, and the speed will change to up to 150. So we're really trying to impact the lower end and expand access, and that's our big thing: is how do we find more avenues and paths to get people into aviation as low a cost as possible.
Jack, that sounds fantastic. And what are you doing here at AOPA in Carbondale?
Well, AOPA and EAA have always tried to partner on all the advocacy issues together. So we have a booth here, and we come to all the AOPA events, and then I try to get every one of them to attend the town hall with Mark Baker. So when he has this town hall, he invites me up, and we talk about what we're working on together in Washington. So this will be the 3rd one this year. I won't make the last one. I'm going on vacation that week. So, but it's been a great partnership with AOPA and Mark, and I think both organizations are working hard together.
Jack, thanks for talking with us today, and thanks for everything you do for general aviation.
Thanks, Max. Good to see you.
And I'm talking with Adrian Eichhorn, who I've known for many years, a JetBlue pilot. He just walked by the booth. Adrian, you did an amazing trip around the world in your Bonanza. Tell folks what that was like and some of the risk management things that you had to think about.
Okay, Max, thanks. Yeah, it really was an amazing experience. The first thing I would say is I started planning the trip about 2 years out, and when I started the planning, I took into fact that I looked back from the day I started flying, the risks, and I've analyzed when I've made mistakes in airplanes, and it always basically boils down to being in a hurry, distractions, and fatigue. Generally, if I find myself being distracted, say if I'm in the cockpit at JetBlue and a flight attendant comes up and they disrupt us when we're doing a checklist, that's a marker. If I'm in a hurry, if they're trying to slam me in behind somebody going into JFK and I'm 3 miles and possible go around, that's being hurried. If I'm flying a red eye and I'm fatigued and it's bad weather up in Boston, that's a fatigue issue. So I tried to consider those 3 elements and those 3 risks in everything I did going around the world. And ironically, I tried also to eliminate any single point of failure. In other words, I took 2 rafts instead of 1 because I thought if one raft goes out and it sinks, I don't want to be floating in the water. I had 5 VLTs. I had backup comms, backup this. The only thing I didn't have redundancy for was the engine. So it's kind of ironic flying a single-engine airplane, but that's a level of risk that you just have to accept. I know a lot about the engine. I built it myself. I know how to tell whether it's healthy. And if you're not willing to accept the risk, obviously you shouldn't do something. And on the round-the-world trip, I was comfortable with everything, but on every leg I considered those. And I think what was really valuable, I had 2 guys, John Whitehead, who was a retired FedEx captain down in Texas, and Bill Compton, a Bonanza guy up in Seattle, Washington, both very experienced in areas of weather and fatigue and long-distance flying. And I told them on all of my long legs, we'd convene a conference call, and it would not be Adrian's decision to fly from point A to point B. They could read my tone, they were following the trip, and it would be the 3 of us collectively making the decision to go, say, from Dubai down to Sri Lanka on an 1,800-mile, 14-hour flight. So, I tried to evaluate the risk ahead of time, or identify the risk ahead of time, and then constantly evaluate. I would want to take off every morning as soon as I could before the sun came up to maximize performance because I'm so heavy with 240 gallons of gas. But there were always delays. There was always then making me in a hurry to take off before it got hot. So I like to focus on those 3 things. When I find myself distracted or being in a hurry or just dead tired, I kind of am more sensitive to what I'm doing then with that. So, but yeah, it was an amazing experience. Got to experience all of those on almost every leg.
And were there any legs where you chose not to go?
Actually, just one. And it was going from Kuala Lumpur to Manila because of the intertropical convergence zone and the thunderstorms in that part of the world that, if you're going to wait for the perfect day, you can never do a trip like this. You have to accept that you are going to be flying in the area of thunderstorms, but how bad are they going to be? Because when you're flying, say, 15 hours, you can't just go in the morning and be on the ground by the afternoon. So, yeah, there were some there, but for the most part, the trip went pretty much as planned.
So, did you do anything special to modify the fuel system for the aircraft?
Yeah, I put the big tip tanks on, 100 gallons each. They were old military drop tanks that were designed, and they started life as 230-gallon tanks. They were cut up, welded with baffles and sending unit to 100-gallon tanks, and I got them on a field approval. So I've got a 26-hour range, and my longest leg was only 17 hours. So one of the things I did do is I carried extra gas, a lot of extra gas on every leg, because that's one thing I never wanted to put myself in, is a position where I'm running low on fuel, going into a country that I may have never been to and to an airport I know I've never been to. So carried a lot of extra gas, but the trade-off was lack of performance, lack of cruise speed, lack of climb. There were legs where I was only averaging about 100 to 200 foot per minute rate of climb coming out of Egypt and Dubai when it was really hot. So, and then a HF radio and all the other good stuff. So you started by talking about fatigue, and now you've just talked about a 17-hour leg. How does one prepare for that, and what did you do? It's ironic it's interesting that you asked that, Max, because I thought prior to actually executing this trip, my biggest fear would be just staying awake. You couldn't buy sleep. Going across the Pacific, well, first of all, the way I operated the airplane was I would burn all the fuel in the tip tanks first. So every 30 minutes I was switching from, say, right tank, left tank, right. And I would do that at 15 past the hour and 45 past the hour. So that was giving me something to do. And also through the Pacific, I was making ops normal reports on the top and the bottom of the hour, in addition to a position report. So every 15 minutes, you're physically doing something. And I could not have bought sleep. I tried a couple of times to put my head back. I had the window shade and the side window blocking the sun, thinking I just need to take a little nap. Fear keeps you awake. It's amazing. I I was exhausted when I landed, but I never once the whole way could even get a minute's nap in. I tried, but I couldn't.
That's great. I've never heard fear described as an asset when you're flying, but that's really great. So any kind of moments on the entire trip where you thought, wow, this is amazing. I never would have encountered this if it weren't for this trip?
Yeah, I think the day I took off in every landing, the farther you get away from home, you realize how much you're putting your airplane and the trip is really at risk, because as you know, GA is not really popular in any other country, or most countries, like it is in the United States. And if you have a maintenance problem in Dubai or Sri Lanka or Kuala Lumpur, you're probably going to have to mortgage your home just to fix your airplane. So yeah, you realize that every element. And I think I had been gone for about maybe close to 2.5 weeks, and I had landed in Kuala Lumpur, and my ground support guy, John Whitehead, goes, "You're not even halfway yet." And I thought, man, I've got 3 15-hour legs. It's about 8,000 miles from Manila back to the United States, all over water, extended legs. And it's like, holy cow. The only time I was really concerned on the whole trip is from Egypt all the way back to the United States. When you do an eastbound rounding, you're running away from the sun. So you have an element of your flight that's at night. And I love night flying. I'd prefer to fly at night. However, when you're flying, say, a 17-hour leg and you've got 5 hours at night over the Pacific Ocean and you're on top of a layer of undercast, you realize that if the engine quits and you're going to have to ditch it in the ocean, you'll go through a layer of clouds and you'll have very little time to determine the sea state. And you know that if you don't have a perfect landing, where your raft, where your throw bag, where everything is not going to be where you think it is. So that was the one part of the trip that I was never comfortable with. But again, it's a level of risk. It was all or nothing. You either accept it and go or sit at home and think about it. So yeah, it's a good experience, Max. Learned a lot from it.
So any particularly interesting fuel prices or any special arrangements you had to make to have fuel on the trip?
Yeah, it was. Europe wasn't so bad. I must have failed geography in high school, and history and all those subjects, because I thought oil came from that Middle East. And in Dubai, I paid $26 a gallon for avgas. And that's because there is no avgas. They ship it in 55-gallon drums. They know you need it. They can charge whatever you want. So going through the Middle East, it was very expensive for me at the airports that I was at. And I would have thought ahead of time that was going to be the cheapest fuel. I just put a straw or a tube in the ground and siphon it right into the Bonanza. But
so is it possible it might have been cheaper to put a turbine engine in the aircraft before you left?
Oh, absolutely. And then you'd have the reliability of a turbine engine, yeah. And that's an interesting point, because when I started planning the route, I picked airports that I knew that would have avgas. I wanted to pick as few airports that I would have to ship avgas to because of the cost and the thought of maybe it doesn't show up. So I went, when you go around the world, you don't have a whole lot of options if you elect not to go to China or Russia for cost or for whatever reason. There's not a lot of ways through the Middle East and through the Pacific in an airplane that's only got like a 2,000-mile or 3,000-mile range. So avgas is something you really need to look at. So
just briefly, tell us about the different presentations you're giving here at AOPA in Carbondale.
Well, thanks, Max. As you know, I'm an IA, and I've been fortunate to obtain those ratings a long time ago, and I've been doing quite a bit of research in whether engines are healthy in terms of what bore scopes, the value of a bore scope, and all the tests that can be determined. So the first one I have this morning is your engine healthy? It's very well attended. It's a good seminar. Yesterday, Mike Bush, Paul New, and I, we run the workshop for AOPA here, which is a workshop designed to teach owners and pilots about maintenance and aircraft ownership and managing their maintenance. And then about 10 minutes, I'm going to be giving a presentation, risk management, flying around the world.
And if people can't see you here, are you going to be in Gulf Shores?
I will be, absolutely. I'll be down there and probably doing more of the same, buddy.
Excellent. Adrian Eichhorn, a real pleasure. See you down in Alabama.
Max, it's good to see you too, buddy. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
And our next guest is very accomplished. Not only is she a college math professor, but she also owns and operates the ACE Aerobatic School in Sewanee, Tennessee. Now, that's the school that was formerly operated by Jim Kirshner before he passed away. Jim, of course, wrote many books on aviation, and Catherine was lucky enough to have done a lot of spins with him in the air. And I'm talking today with Catherine Cavagnaro. Catherine, you recently got a rather prestigious award. Tell us about that.
I am honored and humbled to be the 2018 FAA Safety Representative of the Year.
Congratulations. So obviously there are a lot of FAASTeam reps around the country, and you must be going above and beyond. Tell us some of the kinds of things that you are doing to help promote safety.
Well, thank you. That's kind. I give presentations for the FAA and AOPA, and I'm bullish on the WINGS program. So my presentations share safety messages about flying our airplanes. What I try to do is make aerodynamics visible for a general aviation pilot so that that person can understand more about his or her airplane by seeing it.
And you just showed me some videos. Tell folks about some of the kind of videos that you've done to help demonstrate this.
One of the videos of which I am most proud is a video of an extended spin in which I put tufting all over the top of the wings, and I put cones at the end of the wingtips so that you could witness during the spin where the wings are stalled. It turns out that the inside wing is at a higher angle of attack than the outside wing is, and that's evidenced by the strings that are dancing all over the inside wing, and the vortex on the inside wing is completely gone. So what it says is that that wing is not lifting at all, whereas the outside wing is also mostly stalled, but there's enough attached flow at the tip to create some lift. And that's the imbalance that's going to perpetuate the spinning motion.
You also showed me a video in which you looked at wingtip vortices. Tell us about what you discovered doing that.
One thing that bugged me when I was a student pilot is when I read that wingtip vortices start when the airplane leaves the ground. And intuitively, I did not think that could be true. So one thing I did with a video is I put cones on the edges of the wings so that you could see during the takeoff roll that the wing vortices have started while the plane is still on the ground. So the moral of the story is if you're trying to avoid wake turbulence by operating on a part of the runway that another aircraft has just operated and you think you're avoiding the wingtip vortices there, it's just not true.
Now, you also showed me that it changed once the flaps are retracted. What happened there?
During my seminars, when I ask which situation is worse for generating vortices, is it for a clean aircraft or a dirty aircraft? And generally, half the people say clean, half the people say dirty. And I think there's that misinformation out there because people have never been given a good reason. So in that same video, I have cones on both the flaps and the wingtips. So you can see that when the flaps are down, I have 4 vortices. And then when the flaps go up, what happens is those vortices on the flaps go away and the ones on the wingtips become stronger. So I have 4 weaker vortices turning into 2 stronger ones. So the generating aircraft gives the worst vortex situation when the flaps are up. So it's heavy, clean, and slow is the worst situation.
And you've just given a presentation here this afternoon. Tell us about that.
I gave a presentation at the AOPA fly-in here, and it was on loss of control events, and I chose to discuss stalls and spins, wake turbulence upsets, and also pilot-induced oscillations, which even though pilot-induced oscillations don't tend to take lives, they certainly hurt airplanes. And I was working and doing some flight testing at the University of Tennessee Space Institute before I knew how to properly recover from a pilot-induced oscillation, and I just think that's wrong. So I try to include those sorts of tips when I give presentations like this.
And you're becoming a more active writer these days. Where can people find your work?
I'm writing more frequently now for AOPA Pilot, and my articles tend to be in the proficiency section. So you can look for safety articles from me on a regular basis there.
So is there a place where people can find more information about you on the web?
Sure. My website is aceaerobaticschool.com.
That's great. Thanks so much for your time today, Catherine.
You bet. Thanks, Max.
And I'm in the ForeFlight booth talking with Alex Montgomery. Alex, tell us what's new in ForeFlight these days.
Thanks, Max. Appreciate you stopping by. Yeah, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about what's new in ForeFlight. So some of our latest features have to do with situational awareness, increasing the awareness that we bring to pilots in the cockpit. One thing is our synthetic vision display, which displays beautifully on your iPad if you're connected to an AHRS device, such as Sentry or Stratus, now includes traffic. So you can get ADS-B traffic targets on that synthetic vision display. You can pan around in 3D space, be able to find them more easily, and then know what sector of the sky you need to scan to be able to find that traffic. In addition, we also have all of the new FAASTeam weather products that's displayed on that FAASTeam network in ForeFlight. So that includes cloud tops, lightning, turbulence, and center weather advisories or CWAs are now displayed on ForeFlight if you're connected to an ADS-B portable device like Sentry or Scout or Stratus. Some other great enhancements we've made to situational awareness is airspace and profile view. So if you're on a Pro Plus subscription or higher, you're going to be able to get profile view, which if you plan a route through some complex airspace, possibly like a Class Bravo of Miami or Orlando or Houston, that may have a TFR, some restricted airspace in it, and you're trying to find what altitude you need to fly to not enter the Bravo airspace, if you put in your route, you put in your altitude, and you click profile view, you're going to be able to get a 3D depiction of that airspace in profile. And it's going to show at your altitude with a little line whether you're in that airspace or you're above it or below it. And then if you are in that airspace, you can tap on one of those cells to get more information about that airspace, such as its floor, its ceiling, and it's also going to highlight it on the aeronautical map layer in ForeFlight so that you know exactly where your route is entering that airspace. So those are some of the great new features that we've added. Is there anything specific you'd like to know?
So you've got a new ADS-B in product, and I guess that's got other features as well. Tell us about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So we released our Scout product last year, and then we released Sentry this year. So Sentry is our full-featured ADS-B and portable receiver. It's got 12 hours of battery life, dual-band ADS-B weather and traffic, a carbon monoxide detector, which is a first for ADS-B portables that will alert not only on ForeFlight, but the unit itself will actually emit a very loud oral warning, which can be heard over the sound of an engine. In addition to that, it's incredibly portable. It's about the size of a deck of cards, and it comes in with a quick-release RAM mount. So you can suction cup into the window, you can go fly. With the 12 hours of battery life, you're going to get a lot of life out of that. And additionally, it has a WASP GPS. It's got AHRS, so it can power that synthetic vision with traffic and ForeFlight that I just talked about. And that's available at $499. You can purchase that on Amazon and at Sporties.
Now, I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you, if you were looking at my iPhone right now, it says for ForeFlight that I need to download 117 items. So tell me about automatic downloads.
Great question. Yeah, automatic downloads is definitely going to help you get that down a little bit more. So automatic downloads is a setting. It is enabled by default, but you can turn it off within the settings menu that if you're connected to Wi-Fi and you have your device sitting there, any kind of outstanding download for ForeFlight, it's just going to go ahead and start it. So instead of you having to go to the tab, look at the big scary 117 number and click download yourself or go through that, it's just going to do it for you. So next time when you're ready to fly, you have a buddy that calls you and say, hey, the weather's beautiful, let's go fly. You don't have to worry about not having up-to-date information.
Well, that's going to be handy because these days I have to remember to go ahead and download ahead of time, so I need to enable that particular feature, especially when I've got a big trip going on. Well, I'm sure virtually everybody out there knows where to find out about ForeFlight, but for those who might not, where do people find out more about ForeFlight?
Again, great question, Max. So there are three main places that I can think of. The first is our website, foreflight.com. We're going to post more about the latest features. We'll have some videos about those features. The second would be our video library also on our website, foreflight.com/videos. Or if you're on our website and you hover over the support item, you'll see video library. That has some amazing videos about new features, about how to use the app from the basics, the fundamentals, all the way through to the more advanced topics. And the third is we're always on frequency. We're real pilots. We're here to help anytime, 24/7 at team@foreflight.com. That's team@foreflight.com.
And I guess if I want to preview the app, how do I go about doing that if I've got my smartphone in front of me?
If you'd like to give ForeFlight a try, just open the App Store. It's the little funky looking A, search for ForeFlight, download it, and you'll be able to start a 30-day trial. You can also purchase a subscription on our website at foreflight.com/pricing.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Max. You appreciate it.
And one of our listeners and Patreon sponsor, Chris Carnahan, just walked up. Chris, how the heck are you?
I'm great, and it's great to see you, Max.
You were just starting to tell me a story about a go-around a minute ago. Tell me about that.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying that I was going to the airport to practice takeoffs and landings, and I was going to do some go-arounds. And I thought, oh, yeah, Max had an episode on this. So what I decided to do is, the 10-minute trip to the airport, I just found that episode and started listening to it. It was like having a mini flight instruction right before I got in the plane. So it was great. It's just very valuable, and appreciate what you do.
Great. Thanks very much. Now, you also sent me a picture of your Bonanza panel. Tell us about that and how the podcast affected that.
Well, my plane was in annual, so I couldn't fly, and I came across your podcast, and I started binge listening to those while I was trying to, waiting to get the chance to fly again. And I came across the Garmin, the one that you interviewed the folks from Garmin.
That would be the G5, right?
G5, yeah, interview. And so it piqued my interest, and I talked to the folks that were doing the installation or doing the annual for me, and asked them about doing the installation. And so I ended up, with 2 G5s on my panel now, and it's your fault, Max. So thanks for that. But it's great. I'm very happy with the product, and it's a neat thing. But it would have been because I bounced across your podcast, so they owe you some money over there at Garmin.
Well, I sent a picture of your Bonanza, and they love the installation. So all I can say is thanks so much for listening and for supporting the show.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing. I've turned a lot of friends onto it, and keep up the good work.
Thanks so much, Chris. Have a great show.
Thanks.
And Bob Sugar has just walked up. Bob, tell people where you and I first met.
Max and I met at Palm Springs at a CPPP, which is Cirrus Pilot Proficiency Program.
And that was when we were teaching you some proficiency in your Cirrus SR20. Now, you just told me that you're moving up and you're just flying something else. What is that?
In August, I took delivery of a Cirrus Vision Jet. And, I finished my mentorship, I finished my type training, and I flew that plane here today to Southern Illinois University to the AOPA event.
That's great. And what's your home base?
Chicago. I keep the plane in Gary, Indiana.
Now, we mentioned the trip home this evening. What's going to be a little bit different about that?
Well, the trip home's going to be kind of different because there's going to be some rain and some thunderstorms, and we're going to try to attempt to use the weather radar for the first time since I got my type training.
Yeah, and you and I both know that that's not something we've spent any time on in the simulator. You only got that during the 25 hours of mentorship. So how many hours do you have with you in your airplane now?
Probably about 50 hours.
And what's it feel like, flying this airplane?
It's just it's kind of a Cirrus SR20 turbo on steroids. It's very similar. It's the Garmin G3000 is a great avionics platform. The plane flies wonderfully, and it's not much different. You just have to remember a few things, with your landing gear and your flap speeds, and just a few little differences.
Yeah, and in terms of the system knowledge, huge difference in terms of all that. So what kind of trips are you planning to make with the plane?
Next week I'm going to another Cirrus event in Henderson, Nevada. So my wife and will be taking off next week to fly to Henderson. That'll be the furthest that I will have flown since my mentorship on the plane. And a couple weeks later, I've got a trip planned to Savannah, ultimately to Hilton Head, and maybe to Atlanta. And I'm based in the Chicago area.
Great. So you're using it primarily for fun or also for business?
Primarily for fun. Primarily for fun. Once in a while, I'll use it for business, but it's not a business tool for me right now.
So I see a pretty big grin on your face right now. Is that kind of how you feel every time you fly the plane or think about it?
Listening to the jet engine is pretty exciting. It's a different feel than, the propeller plane. And when you're looking straight ahead, you're not looking through a propeller. You're looking out into the clear.
Any particular challenges you felt transitioning into the aircraft?
It was a lot more difficult than I had anticipated, the type training. The ground was intense. You were there a week doing ground. You had to know the systems really well. It's a completely different experience from doing the SR22. The SR22 is more of a, hey, we get to the factory, we do 3 or 4 days of transition, and it's all fun. This was a lot of work, a lot of schoolwork, a lot of prep before you got there. You have to know those systems inside and out in order to pass your check ride. And then after you get all the systems down, then you're doing the check ride, and you're as a private instrument rated private pilot, you have to perform them to ATP standards. So I mean, it's not as easy as it sounds when you're talking about buying it, but as long as you persevere and you do the hard work, it's very, very achievable.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It is hard work. It's probably one of the tougher things that any piston pilot would ever do, but all that work that you've just described is going to be pretty much the same for any jet that someone might step up to.
Right. That's exactly right. I guess I went into it thinking that this was just going to be a grown-up version of an SR22, not realizing that the training is exactly the same kind of training you would be doing in the airlines. And knowing the systems, for a guy that's a piston pilot, then having to know the systems inside and out was a lot of training and a lot of coursework. Cirrus provided great videos for all that stuff. And, you just sit there and watch the video, take notes, watch the video, take notes, and eventually it sinks in.
So I'm thinking you have all the preparation you now need for your future career. Are you thinking about the regionals?
It's funny you say that. I have a son that's going into the regionals. He's doing his type training as we speak. So I know exactly what they're going through, and it's very similar to what we had to do for the Vision Jet.
That's great. Bob, so much fun to connect with you again. Thanks for stopping by.
All right. Thanks, Max.
And we've got another listener who's walked up to the booth. Tell me your name.
My name is Chris Rose with Matrix Avionics.
And tell me what you fly and where you came in from this morning.
I have a 2005 SR20. Share that with my partner Ed here. We came in from Gwinnett County Airport, Lima Zulu uniform, about 2 hours and 5 minutes. So it's a nice ride.
Sounds like an easy way to get to the fly-in here.
Nice, easy way, especially since he flew. It was super easy today.
It sounds like you're a flight instructor. Let the other people do all the work.
Exactly. But yeah, I'm looking forward to a great day here. It looks like fantastic weather, a little warm, but great skies, great sunshine, and a lot of great people.
And tell me how you found the podcast.
I'm a podcast listener. I have a 35-minute commute, so I'm kind of always looking for podcasts. I came across yours, and it was emphasized Cirrus a little bit more than others, so added that, and it's become my favorite one. I love the format. Love how you hit all the news up front. Then you talk about things out of your experience, from your CFI experience. So I always learn something every time I listen.
That's great. Well, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you very much, Max.
Have a great show.
You too. Bye.
And tell me your name.
Steve Snyder.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Tell me about your avionics upgrade you're working on right now.
Well, I've got a Piper Dakota, and I needed to upgrade and do the ADS-B update for the end of next year. So to do that, I decided to go with Garmin GTX 345. It was one of those where if you do one step, you might as well do two. So I needed to upgrade my Garmin 430s to be WAS. And so instead of putting all the money in that, I decided to upgrade one of them and go to a Garmin GTN 750. So while I was doing that, I decided I might as well do the G5. So I put in dual G5s. So looking forward to getting the Garmin GFC 500 Autopilot approved by Garmin for the Dakota. And I'll be installing that just as soon as it becomes available.
You're going to have a really sweet plane when you get done here.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it immensely. Looking at the pros and cons of deciding whether to invest the money to go to something newer and has the equipment already, and a newer 182 or maybe even an older Cirrus, and decided that the capabilities and performance of the Piper Dakota meets my needs. So I decided to put the package in the Dakota, and I'm looking forward to getting it all put together.
And where are you based out of?
Davis County, Indiana, Delta Charlie Yankee.
That's great. Have a good show. Thanks for stopping by.
All right. Thanks, Max.
Hi there. Tell me your name.
Bob Crum.
Bob, I saw your shirt. What does it say?
It says Zilmer Air Park, Palmyra, Illinois.
Awesome. So I'm not familiar with the air park. I'm sure there are listeners who are. Tell us about it.
It's just a small little grass strip with a smaller paved runway, about 2,900 feet, out in the middle of the farm country here in Illinois.
How many planes based on the field?
About 23. We did have a pancake breakfast earlier this past month, and we served about 700 people. and we had 60 airplanes fly into our little bitty facility.
Wow, you're making me hungry. So I see you're with some of your friends here. What do you guys fly?
We all fly Champs, and we all belong to the same club that has a Cessna 172.
So for folks who aren't familiar with the Champ, tell us about that aircraft.
Well, a Champ's a tail dragger. Mine happens to be a 1947. It's a 65 horsepower that's been modified somewhat to 75. Hand prop. Kick the tires and light the fire, and let's go.
And so, in terms of so no electrical system, I guess.
No electrical system yet. We may be working on one. Maybe a little more horsepower where I don't have to get out and spin the prop.
And so when you're navigating from point to point, are you just looking outside or are you using some other assistance?
Oh, I may cheat a little bit. I use ForeFlight. But, you look at one cow and then find the next cow and go on.
Good thing you can compare those cows to what you see on ForeFlight and you know which one you're flying over.
Yeah, I do fly down to a little flying community in Arkansas. We have a place down there. You see different things on the way down.
So what's the best thing about flying a Champ compared to flying other airplanes?
Low and slow, and the thing I enjoy the most is the landings and the takeoffs. Just try to kiss the ground every time.
And I guess you probably enjoy watching the world go by below?
Yes, sir, at a very slow pace.
Well, that's the good thing, right? I'm guessing you're never inside a cloud?
Well, you can guess that.
Well, I guess that when that occasionally happens, you're safe.
I have a few words that I say when that happens, and then I get out of the cloud as soon as I can.
Oh, that's good. Hey, thanks for stopping by. Real pleasure to talk to you today. Enjoy the show.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And tell me your name.
David Parks.
And you just told me what?
I just came up and told you that I love your podcast, and I've listened to it from the beginning.
That's great. And where are you from, and what do you fly?
I'm from Mount Vernon, Illinois, and right now I fly a Jabiru, a light sport craft. I'm a student pilot. I soloed 10 days ago.
Congratulations. And what was that like?
It was exciting. I was ready, though, but it was exciting, yeah. And like everybody says, the aircraft performance is much better without that CFI end. I was up to pattern altitude much quicker than usual.
The funny thing is, nobody told me that when I did my solo, but I did figure out, just fly the same airspeeds. So, yep, that's really great. So what have you liked about the podcast? Any particular things you've learned or things you like?
Well, one thing I wanted to stop by and tell you that the answer you gave, the thoughtful answer you gave to the pilot who had lost some friends, I thought was really touching. I thought you did a great job. I appreciate that. I've never been in that situation myself. I hope I never am, but I thought you handled that very well.
Thanks very much. Well, we try to answer all the questions, especially the tough ones, and that's probably one of the aspects that just doesn't get talked about a whole lot. I did have someone who emailed me recently and said that they were 50 and they had never lost anybody in aviation, and I hope that's the case for you.
Yeah, I'm about to turn 50, and I hope that I never lose anyone either, yeah. But I really appreciate that you do talk about the tough topics, that things, people don't want to talk about. You talked about depression and anxiety, and that hits home to a lot of people. I mean, I think you help a lot of people with that, so I appreciate it.
That's great. Thanks so much. And what are you looking forward to do when you get your private? What kind of flying are you going to do?
Oh, it's just going to be recreation. I'm going to fly around for the $100 hamburger, take friends up, stuff like that. Just enjoy the flying.
Well, great. Well, have a great show here in Carbondale.
Thank you. You too.
Pleasure to meet you. Come on around here. And I'm talking with a student from SIU. What is SIU?
So SIU is Southern Illinois University out here in Carbondale, Illinois. My name is Zach Zimmerman. I'm a senior here in the flight program. So I'm working on my CFI, certified flight instructor, hoping to finish up here and then work part-time here before I graduate.
Good. And what's next for you, Zach?
So next I'm going to flight instruct, build some hours, and then I'm an airman trainee for Air Wisconsin. So once I get to my 1,000 hours, going to head over there.
And what kind of equipment do you think you'll be flying there?
So they have the CRJ 200s, so I'll be flying those.
Good. So what kind of aircraft do they fly here at SIU?
So we have Cessna 172s, and then we just got brand new Piper Arrows. So we have P models for the 72s, R models, and then the G1000s with a nice glass display. And now with the new Piper Arrows, those are really nice too. Full glass cockpit, autopilot, the whole works.
So when did you get interested in aviation and decide to become a pilot?
So I grew up about 10 minutes away from O'Hare Airport. So ever since I was a little kid, my mom's got pictures of me just staring up, looking at the planes flying in, and it's always been a passion of mine. So I kind of always knew I wanted to go into aviation. And then SIU gave me a great opportunity to follow my dreams. So.
Super. So if somebody else wants to go to college and become a pilot, good place to go?
Absolutely, 100% recommend it. I think it's a great place, great atmosphere. We're one big family, so.
Yeah, and Carbondale here in Southern Illinois, nice quiet part of the world here. Pretty, what can I say? It's got that nice Midwest feel.
Yeah, definitely. I'm from the city, so coming down to the country, I wasn't quite sure how I'd fit in, but there's a lot of opportunities for everything. It's beautiful down here. Go sightseeing. Now that it's turning more to the fall season, flying around, watching those color changes, it's just absolutely stunning.
That's great. Well, thanks for stopping by to say hello and have fun with your future airline career.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm talking to the first judge who's come up to the booth here today. Judge, tell me your name and where you're from.
Mike Smith from Wynne, Arkansas. I'm here with my son Samuel, who's 13 and just started taking flying lessons.
That's fantastic. Now you're on the bench. What kind of things are you deciding?
I do traffic issues and small misdemeanor criminal issues and small claims civil.
Okay. So you told me that you're looking to buy an airplane. What kind of planes are you thinking about?
We're looking at several starter planes, maybe a Grumman Tiger, a Cessna 172, 182, or a Myers 200 is one I've come across that I'm really interested in if I'm trying to get some more information on right now.
Yeah, that's cool. We have a Myers on our field, not that many of them are around. So tell us about your son and his interest in aviation.
Well, his mother's a pilot as well. I used to fly for the regional airlines, so he's developed an interest. He is actually one of a triplet. He has two sisters his age also who haven't shown any interest yet, but he's picked it up big time, and he's been around the whole field here. Most of the people on the field know his name by now. I don't know if that's good or bad.
That's great. So what have you seen here that you find interesting?
I really like the seminars myself. I'm kind of been out of aviation for a few years. I'm gradually been getting back into it. So the Rusty Pilot seminars, the aviation seminars with all the modern technology, things changed so drastically in the past 10 years with all the information that's available for pilots today. I think it's going to be much safer, and we're just really enjoying catching up with technology.
That's great. Thanks for stopping by today, and have fun picking your next airplane.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot. Good luck to you.
So I'm talking with Ray Hobbs, who is an exhibitor here at AOPA in Carbondale. And Ray has solved a rather interesting problem, and he's got some sunglasses that are rather unique. Tell me first, Ray, about the problem that you encountered and what you were trying to solve.
Well, over my flying career as I aged, I was having trouble with glare, and I was having trouble when I wore dark sunglasses to see the instrument panel. The instrument panel was just too dark through ordinary sunglasses. And then I tried to find some sunglasses like gradient sunglasses. They helped. But then I really wanted a sharp view of the instruments at all time. So I worked on developing some tri-tinted sunglasses that are dark for looking over the nose of the aircraft, but have a clear section just for the instrument panel, then lightly tinted for the approach charts. So it basically has taken me over a decade to develop the product, and then now I'm marketing it at AOPA fly-ins.
Yeah, and you just showed me there was an article in the March issue of AOPA Pilot magazine when Ian Twombly was comparing different sunglasses. So these have kind of a rather unique look to them. Describe for people what this pair of sunglasses you have in your hand look like.
Well, what they look like to an ordinary person are what are called trifocals. They look like trifocals because the intermediate area is clear and then the reading area is lightly tinted. And they have an old-fashioned look, so it takes a little bit of courage to put them on and walk out with them.
Yeah, so basically if we have a non-prescription version of this, there's no power added to the sunglass, so it's not like a bifocal or trifocal in that sense. However, you've got different areas that are tinted at kind of different densities. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that's right. And also the different areas can also have reading sections. So you can have a reader in the bottom, and you can also have power in the clear area, and I can do prescription lenses if I have the prescription.
So as I look at this, it looks to me like about 75 to 80% of the lens has the normal sunglass material. And then if you look at where the eyes are, they're little sections that are about the size of an eye. And the top portion of it's clear with no dark material. And the lower portion, that's a little bit darker, and that's where you put the prescription in for readers?
I can put it in the clear area and the darker area, or the whole lens. So it's fairly flexible. And basically, for most pilots, I end up custom making exactly what they want. They tell me what they want. I typically send them a trial pair. They try it, tell me what they like about it, what they don't like, and then I make them another pair until I finally get it right.
That's great. And what's the ballpark pricing on these?
Well, these they start at $75 for just the Plano, but basically, when you get up to a Ray-Ban good quality, you're looking like about $280.
Okay. And what's the name of the company? Where do people find out more information about it?
The company is SkySight Vision, and our website is skysight.com, SKYSIGHT.com.
Great, Ray. Thanks so much for showing us the sunglasses.
Thank you very much, Max.
Well, there you have it. Some of the conversations that I had in Carbondale, Illinois at the AOPA Regional Fly-In. Great fun. So if you can possibly make it to the next one, the last one of the year, come on down to Gulf Shores, Alabama later this month in October. And if you think that someday you might buy a new or slightly used Cirrus, please contact me today. I can help arrange a free demo flight for you if you're considering a new Cirrus and help you understand the many factors, not all of which are obvious in buying a new versus a slightly used Cirrus. I specialize in the Cirrus and work with people around the world. And if I could ask just one thing of you, please take a moment to think of one or two of your friends who you think might enjoy this show, if only they knew about it. Then later today, contact them, tell them about the show. That's the way that most people find out about this podcast, because someone like you took a moment to tell someone else about the show. And if they're not familiar with what a podcast is, well, just send them to the Apple App Store to download our dedicated Aviation News Talk podcast app. We've also got a dedicated app available in the Google Play Store for Android users. Until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.
And is there any place people should be following you on social media or a website? Don't use that question. You should have seen the look on her face.
That's so good on the social media thing. I don't know what Twitter is.
Only this were video. Darn. Oh, darn. That was... Was there anything I could have said that would have gotten a stronger reaction from you than that? That was really fabulous.
Let's just say I don't have the best presence on social media. So, but I do have a website, acerabatic.school.com.
Well, hang on. So